Good afternoon. I am calling to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. My name is Elizabeth Glidden. I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm joined by council members Quincy, Fry, Kano, and Andrew Johnson, and we are a quorum of the committee. We have 3 items on discussion today. The first is a brief item because it was already presented in the Transportation and Public Works Committee. And Mr. Ranieri, would you please help kick us off?
Sure. Madam Chair and members, this resolution, which is rather lengthy, was presented in Public Transportation and Public Works on Tuesday. But it is basically in 3 parts, 3 resolve clauses. And the first, the whereas, is really talk about the topic here is railroad safety, and it all came out of what's happening with the movement of oil by rail. It's grown dramatically from probably around 65,000 tank cars in 2011 to almost 493,000 in 2014. So then most of those trains come to from North Dakota, through Minnesota to the east and the south. Almost 6 or 7 a day come through Minneapolis. And recently, with the improvements in reconstruction of railroad tracks to the north of us, more trains are coming through downtown now, by Target Center. There have been a lot of activities occurring across the country, particularly the U.S. Department of Transportation, implementing new rules. New rules on May 1st, which basically reduce speeds, new design for rail tank cars, braking systems, and a discussion of how to route these trains currently and communicate with cities and first responders about possible incidents. The resolve clause talks about some activities the feds can do, the federal government can do, funding for rail crossings and legislation. Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin has introduced the bill, and I think parts of it are in the transportation bill. Being discussed by Congress now, dealing with things like communications with first responders, requiring a study for insurance and other issues. At the state level, we're suggesting more communication with PCA and ourselves, and at the local level, cities inviting the discussion with the railroad companies on an ongoing basis, a regular basis, about issues of safety and transport through our city. So, Madam Chair, and briefly, that's what's in the resolution. It came out of a discussion over the last couple of months between folks from the council and staff about the whole issue of how the railroads are changing and how they're impacting our city.
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri. And this did get some general discussion in Transportation Public Works. I think I just realized this. Is there an RCA with this? Maybe I just didn't get it.
Madam Chair, I don't think there was one. I think it was my understanding that an RCA wasn't necessary because it was a resolution from the council member.
Okay. I thought there always was an RCA. Well, anyway, the things that I think would be on the RCA, so I might just add a couple of motions here, are because I think we would want to direct staff to review the resolution for potential updates to our federal agenda and come back to this committee with those recommendations at the appropriate time. And also for a second direction to staff to review this resolution for potential updates to our state legislative agenda and to incorporate those into our statement of policy positions. And so I think, why don't we vote on those? Let's first vote to approve the resolution itself, and then we can vote on the staff directions. So on the resolution, I'll go ahead and move it. Yeah, I see that. I'll move it so that's in front of us. And Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank staff for this, our legislators, and especially council members Reich, Bender, and Palmisano for this work. Actually, last summer was biking along the Kenilworth corridor and saw a oil car train that stretched from before Target Field all the way to the Mississippi River and was biking along next to it. Just shocked that we would run such a highly volatile chemicals, which obviously pose such a huge risk to life, not and property, of course, through the heart of our city, through one of the most densely populated neighborhoods and all of the apartments that are down there. And especially when you have the NTSB saying that they should be avoiding these routes. It's incomprehensible that they would route at the risk to so many people these chemicals through the city when there are alternatives available. And I just hope we get something done on this front because we absolutely need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just echoing Councilmember Johnson's sentiment, we have a rail that goes dead through sections of Northeast, right through the East Bank, and then downtown and North Loop, and there are countless residents, literally a stone's throw away from where a potential fireball could occur. And if you talked with the fire chief, he's very clear about the amount of damage that could potentially take place if and when, hopefully just if, one of the cars were to explode. It's more than a little bit concerning. And granted, we have limited powers at the city, but I do appreciate the movement of this resolution.
Any other comments? Okay, so we have the motion before us to approve the resolution. All in approval of the resolution, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, and that item is approved. And then second, we have the two staff directions that relate to incorporating the resolution into additions, if necessary, to our federal agenda and state legislative agendas. Any discussion on that motion on the staff directions? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, and that item is approved as well. And we have concluded with that item. Our second item is almost the final culmination, not quite the final culmination of what is a lot of work by our staff to coordinate with other city departments to identify potential changes to our state legislative agenda, vet those suggested changes, and then bring those ideas to us and make other modifications as needed to our state legislative agenda. So, Ms. Bergman, can you lead us through where we're at right now?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Council members. Sasha Bergman with the IGR Department. As Councilmember Glidden said before you today, are proposed modifications to the state legislative policy positions. This document guides our advocacy work at the Capitol on behalf of the city as issues arise. And the changes we are recommending today, as Councilmember Glidden mentioned, are based on ideas from across the enterprise, from staff and from council members and from the mayor's office as well. The state legislative agenda, so the short list for 2016, has not yet been determined, and we expect to bring recommendations for that to you in December, at the December IGR meeting. The document attached to the RCA is using tracked changes. We thought that might be the easiest way to really be transparent with you about the recommended changes. So we're just going to walk through the document, and I'm not going to talk about every change. Some of them are just kind of tweaks to existing policies, but I will highlight some of the new ideas. So if you start on just page 2 of the policy positions in the local government finance section, this is just some staff updates that we've recommended. The bottom of page 2 under capital bonding, and moving on to page 3, we have updates suggested just to reflect our current bonding priorities, which I think has been kind of brought through this committee in the past in the form of updates. And if you have any questions, we are happy to answer those. Pages 3 to 4, transportation. It appears that there's some new significant ideas there, but really that's just incorporating ideas that are already adopted by the city in our legislative agenda from 2015. So trying to reflect that in this document as well. Page 4, under municipal governance, the general government section, the last 2 bullets are added, and those 2 are the business licensing ideas that were brought to this committee recently, the mini bars in small boutique hotels, and then the proposal on temporary liquor licenses. Moving to page 5 just has some staff recommended updates and enhancements, and then page 6 under data practices, we did add a provision on body camera data. And then at the bottom of page 6, under sex trafficking, we have the City Attorney's Office proposal regarding party buses. And on page 7, under traffic and driving safety, we added the City Attorney's Office driver diversion program proposal that was brought through this committee a couple of weeks ago. And I'll pause here if there are any questions, otherwise I can continue moving forward. Okay. All right. On page 8 is the affordable housing section, and on the top of page 9, actually, of that section, we have 2 recommended additions that we also worked on these ideas at the League of Minnesota Cities and Metro Cities through their policy development processes this summer and fall. One is related to sustainable state funding for affordable housing and resources to assist communities with meeting obligations to reduce barriers to and promote fair housing and equal opportunity. And then the second one is a proposal to support incentives for rental property owners to participate in the Section 8 program. The remainder of, well, actually, I apologize. On page 9, under youth violence prevention, we did add a supportive statement for strategies that are working to combat terrorism recruitment. I know that there was interest in this at the Capitol last session with a few bills moving, and then I know that there's council member interest in this as well. So we recommend an addition there. Page 10 is just some staff recommended enhancements for sort of existing policies. Same with page 11 and 12. And then if you move to page 13, I want to draw your attention to some new items under building wealth. We do recommend adding a statement regarding the state minimum wage and a supportive statement for increasing the state minimum wage. This is something you might recall that has been in our legislative agenda in the past. It was a couple of years ago, and we recommend adding it back again. Under that section also, the last bullet is a statement in support of increasing funding for programs that provide basic economic assistance for low-income workers and families. Under workforce development, the final bullet there is supportive of state legislation for establishing a uniform contracting threshold for workforce inclusion. And then at the bottom of page 13, we recommend modifying the title to the employment access section to also incorporate workplace policies. And in that section, we are recommending an addition of a statement supporting increased resources for state enforcement of wage theft laws. And then we moved the supportive statement for earned safe and sick time legislation at the state level to that section, and we also added paid leave to that statement. And then on the top of page 14, to that section, we added, or we're suggesting an added statement on in support of legislation that strengthens state laws to ensure health, safety, and equity in the workplace. And then finally, under procurement, we are recommending an added statement supporting development of a program to provide a race-neutral and gender-neutral tool to expand opportunities for develop the capacity of small and local businesses so that all segments of the community can participate in procurement and contracting. And as I mentioned, there's other updates throughout, and we're happy to answer questions about any of them or any of the existing policies that are not being modified at this point.
So I will say this may seem like a little bit of a whirlwind on this one, but most of the changes proposed are, I think, fairly minor tweakings of language to either update the language, smooth it out, correct it to be more in line with what we think might be moving forward now at the Capitol in the city's interests. And we have already had a full session devoted to what is probably a smaller list than sometimes comes to the council for consideration of new policies, and all of those were reflected in here. Any questions? Because beyond that, I think I would go ahead and move approval of this item, and then what would come to us in the future would be a shorter list of a more directed list of what would be our priority issues to focus on at the legislature. Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to echo your remarks here. And first of all, thank you for your leadership on this particular big set of issues. And thank you, as always, to the IGR staff for putting these together, because I think it really does, although it appears up as a little bullet point on this one document, it's a result of a lot of work that happened along the way that's very consistent with the goals, values, and strategic directions that we've passed in the past term, as well as all the individual issues. I'm thinking about the things from the city attorney's office and some of the Cradle to K initiatives. This is all consistent that's gone through our process and with expanded conversation. So just to have them appear as yep, let's do this, doesn't reflect the amount of work that everybody put into this. So thank you very much for that, Madam Chair.
I'm not seeing other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move approval of this item. And ask if there's any discussion. I will say to the entire IGR team, but Ms. Bergman, I know you've been playing a special leadership role this year, and this has just gone very, very smoothly. Thank you for organizing things so well, and to, I think, the whole team for, again, working with a pretty big group of city stakeholders to vet ideas over a multiple month period and kind of do all the work that it takes to make sure we're putting forward ideas that are in line with the city's interests, that are kind of ripe for action with a variety of factors, but also making sure the departments feel like they have a path to putting their issues that help them do their work better before us and understand how to reach the legislative path. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that big bundle of work is approved. So thank you very much. And with that, we have our last discussion item for today. I'm not sure if who is going to introduce here or kind of how you're going to line this all up, but we have a treat today, which is that our federal lobbyists are here to share with us. And unlike what you might suspect, they actually have several things to share. And I just say that because I think kind of the narrative that we understand is that there's not much happening in Washington. So, Mr. Ranieri.
Madam Chair, with that introduction, I'm not sure if I should say anything, but Mr. Bristol and his team are here. We've been meeting with city staff on some issues, and we'll be working on as we start the new year. They're here to give us an update of what's happened and what will happen in the next couple months, particularly the next couple weeks, because Congress wants to be out to the end, early December, and there are some deadlines to get some bills done by December 11th, and also November 20th.
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri and Mr. Bristol. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, council members. It's a pleasure to be here, and you're right, it's a little bit different news that we have to report than last time Bina and I were here. And because last time we were here, as you know, we painted a pretty discouraging picture on what was going on in Washington. But actually in the last 6, maybe 8 weeks, since the visit of Pope Francis to Washington, frankly, perhaps there was a miracle there. That may be his miracle. There have been changes in Washington, D.C. There's been some unusual developments. First, the resignation of the speaker, which was really an extraordinary moment, which I think we are now in the sort of a honeymoon period from that, while the challenges within the majority party there seem to have calmed down. We made a deal, or the administration and the Congress made a deal on the budget, and we also are moving forward on passing the transportation bill, and as you know, that's sort of the poster child for congressional inactivity, because I believe I forget how many extensions we've had to pass in order to keep that going. So this afternoon, my colleague Bina Patel is going to report on the budget deal. I'll talk about the transportation bill, and then we're happy to answer any questions or talk about other issues that you may want to talk to us about. So.
All right, thank you.
So as you all have probably been following, last month Congress passed
And I'm sorry, maybe you want to just make sure you introduce yourself so everybody watching can also know who you are.
Of course, Bina Patel from Bakery BD Consulting, and happy to be working with the city on its federal agenda.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. So as you've all been following, last month, Congress passed the Bipartisan Budget Relief Act of 2015, which essentially sets funding levels for fiscal year 2016 and 2017. The deal raises the top line funding by $80 billion. So it raises the sequestration caps that were agreed to in the last funding deal. That is split evenly between defense and domestic discretionary spending. So we'll have a additional $50 billion in 2016 and $30 billion in 2017. The deal also suspends the debt ceiling limit through March 2017, which essentially allows the president to enjoy somewhat of a budget truce through the end of his term and will get us through the presidential elections. So with the top line funding levels set, the appropriators between now and December 11th will need to determine how to allocate the additional funding. The CR expires on December 11th, and staff have been working through the summer and the fall, hammering out those individual 12 appropriations bill. It's unclear yet how they're going to divide up the additional spending, but the committee is now negotiating those, what the details of that are going to be. And it seems most likely that the bills will be grouped together at the end of the year, sometime in December, in a large omnibus. So some of the potential obstacles, I was being so positive, we had to, throw this in there. Some of the potential obstacles at the end of the year for the omnibus include controversial policy riders that we've seen throughout the year. I don't think none of this is going to be new to you, but they include environmental regulations, sanctuary city language, banking reform, or the repealing of certain provisions of the Dodd-Frank bill, and then Planned Parenthood. But these fights are going to continue, but a lot of it we don't think is actually going to derail the process. I think what's going to happen is what happened when we were passing the continuing resolution extension earlier this year. The House included language in their CR to defund Planned Parenthood. It passed. The Senate then introduced language that would pause funding to Planned Parenthood for 2 years, which didn't pass. And then they went back and stripped all the controversial language and passed a clean CR. So I think that kind of showmanship is going to continue because it's an election year. People want to make statements. But Mitch McConnell in the Senate has indicated that he really wants his party to stop kind of jumping up and down on these same landmines over and over again. So we'll hope maybe we'll see some change.
So I wanted to ask a question on this sheet. So what do you think might be the rider that relates to sanctuary cities?
So we've seen a number of different proposals, both largely in the House. It's unclear to me. The language that's been written that we've seen so far is so vague, and it's actually not even clear. Some 300 cities would qualify as sanctuary cities the way that the language was written. And so and obviously the president, this is the presidential priority, and he would veto any legislation. And in the Senate, it's unlikely that anything that would defund quote unquote sanctuary cities would pass. But I think we'll continue to hear about it. And the administration has been trying to, and you've probably seen, but they're trying to work with communities on the replacement of the Secure Communities Act, which almost nobody liked. Oh, yes, and they're threatening to suspend DOJ funding to these cities.
So, and that's what I was trying to get at. Kind of, what would they be trying to do? Because clearly they're trying to target certain cities, but not all cities, and that's a little bit different than picking out an issue with environmental regulations. It's more about a local control issue.
Right.
Okay. All right. And then can you say a little, maybe you've said enough on this, that you're thinking that the process is unlikely to be completely derailed.
Right. I mean, so these policy riders, there is obviously always a potential for a shutdown if we get to December 11th and they can't pass an omnibus or, the 12 appropriations bills without these controversial policy riders. And then the president would threaten to veto and then we'd start all over again. I think, though, I mean, maybe my colleagues are not as optimistic as I am, but I think the budget deal indicates that they've been working together, and I think everybody wants to get through the end of the year and through an election year without any more kind of big blowups or government shutdown. The last time we had the government shutdown, it wasn't very good in public forum for the Republicans. So I think people want to avoid that. I don't think they want to get dinged in an election year, and I think we will see these riders attached to appropriations bills, but I think it'll be for show, and then they'll strip the funding and go back to having a kind of less controversial, cleaner bill.
Thank you.
So all of this, particularly the budget deal, is good for local governments. It provides some stability. It provides probably more stability than we've had in several years. We'll see a very slight increase in funding dollars. And I think we'll see it says less drama, but I think we'll see less budget drama through next year. And I think that's positive because it provides you all with the ability to plan better and not always be waiting for the last minute to see what Congress is going to do, particularly relating to federal funding. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it on to Ted.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, I was thinking that in some ways, this policy riders, which are among many are very strongly felt, or in some ways they're almost the new earmark because they kind of provide that buy-in when you're trying to pass legislation because you've got your position in the bill and you can move the bill, but then they come to conference and then we have a different discussion. So the transportation bill has passed the Senate in the summer, passed the House recently. They're in conference on it now. They both went in with a 6-year authorization bill with 3 years of funding. We are hearing from now it's coming out that the conferees seem to think they may have found a funding mechanism that will allow them to have a 5 or a little bit more than 5-year fully funded bill. I don't know yet because it hasn't emerged what that specific funding mechanism might be. But it's important to note that in any case, neither side was able to agree to a sustainable funding mechanism to strengthen or replace the gas tax. And so while we were going to make it through for this, we still haven't reached a long-term funding solution for transportation infrastructure. The bill that's passed the House and Senate doesn't include, it's more about policy tweaks to the last bill, MAP 21. They're not really significant changes in current law there. Again, going on now, that the House passed, in order to get the bill through the House, the new speaker had an open rule. There were a number of amendments, probably over 200 that were offered. Maybe half of those were considered. Many were added to the bill. I think we'll see a lot of those will probably be negotiated out over time because some are directly related to the bill. Some are a little bit extraneous to the bill. One of the issues that came through on the House side that's going to have a high profile is the House adopted an amendment that would spread the wealth in terms of transit funding from, as you may know, there's in some of the programs, a very high concentration of funding to go towards the major metropolitan cities with very large transit systems, New York being the biggest example of that. The House amendment talked about spreading that more broadly across the 50 states. Senator Schumer of New York, the minority leader, is leading a very aggressive campaign to restore that funding, and we'll see where that goes, but I would not bet against him. And then apropos of the resolution you recently adopted, that both bills include provisions on freight rail safety. The rail systems weren't able to meet the PTC, the positive train control deadline, the automatic braking systems. They were supposed to have those implemented by the end of the year. That obviously hasn't happened. They were given a 3-year extension. But the Senate bill includes a number of provisions, particularly championed by Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin, which I think capture some of the provisions that you have in your bill as well, particularly focusing on that providing local first responders advance information when dangerous loads are coming through your area, so that they are prepared in advance, rather than now where I think maybe that communication does not occur. And there are also provisions about tanker car design, safety, and other measures. This slide here, I just wanted to, we talked about how there's not significant change. This is obviously way too detailed to read, and you're welcome to, I think maybe I don't know if you can see it on your screens, but you have it in paper. This is just a chart. These are charts showing the transit funding in both the House and Senate bills, and you can see that the differences aren't major, and it's really was just illustrative to kind of show you where this is going. So that's the transportation bill. Council.
So I might just ask a couple questions here. First, can you just remind us how many years it's been since we've passed a transportation bill?
So MAP 21 was expired, was it 3? Well,
so we haven't passed a 6-year bill since 2005.
Right.
And we've been doing.
Should come up.
So we haven't passed a 6-year bill since 2005. But we passed MAP 21, which is a 2-year bill, and that was in.
It was 3 years ago.
It was 3 years ago, so 2012.
Yeah.
And so knowing that there aren't major policy changes, so in other words, kind of the streams that exist are going to exist in kind of the same general format. What can we expect, though, in terms of, and I just can't read that funding chart, but just to tell us in broad brush, how will the funding of those streams compare to what we've been experiencing over the recent years? Is it going to be similar? Will we see it more in line with inflation, or how will that be